Dr. Michael Santos adjusted his wrinkled scrubs as he walked through the marble lobby of Harthwell Corporation headquarters. His hands still trembled slightly. He had just finished a 12-hour emergency surgery. "Excuse me, where is the main auditorium?" he asked politely to the receptionist. Richard Harthwell, CEO of the pharmaceutical company, happened to be walking by and overheard the question. "You cannot be here dressed like that," he said loud enough for nearby executives to hear. "This is a serious corporate event, not some public hospital." Michael tried to explain that he was the keynote speaker for the medical conference that the company itself was hosting, but Richard cut him off. "Security! Escort this man out. Appearance matters here." What Richard didn't know was that in less than 3 hours he would be begging for those same hands he had just humiliated. If this story touches you in any way, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from today. Richard Harthwell had built his $2 billion fortune selling the promise that his company put humanity above profits. At 55 years old, he commanded Harthwell Pharmaceuticals from his 50th floor office in Manhattan, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Central Park, and the walls displayed philanthropy awards alongside photos with world leaders, senators, and Nobel Prize winners. The company's mission statement, etched in gold letters in the marble lobby, read, "Healing through innovation, caring through action." But behind the polished facade of corporate social responsibility, Richard had become increasingly disconnected from the medical realities his company claimed to serve. He surrounded himself with executives who looked successful rather than those who understood medicine. His board meetings, held in a conference room that cost more to furnish than most doctors made in a year, focused primarily on stock prices, market share, and quarterly projections rather than patient outcomes. The transformation of Richard Harthwell from idealistic young entrepreneur to disconnected corporate executive had been gradual but profound. 25 years earlier, he had founded the company with genuine intentions to democratize access to life-saving medications. Fresh out of Harvard Business School, with an MBA focused on healthcare management, Richard had partnered with Dr. Sarah Williams, a brilliant pharmaceutical researcher who had developed breakthrough cardiac medications during her work at Massachusetts General Hospital. Their early partnership had been built on shared values and complementary skills. Dr. Williams brought deep medical knowledge and passionate commitment to serving patients, while Richard contributed business acumen and fundraising abilities that could translate scientific innovations into widely available treatments. Their first office was a converted warehouse in Cambridge, where they worked 18-hour days, developing medications that could help millions of people worldwide. The company's first major success came with CardioMax, a heart medication that Dr. Williams had developed for treating arrhythmias in elderly patients. Unlike existing treatments that were expensive and had significant side effects, CardioMax was both more effective and more affordable, making it accessible to patients who had previously gone without treatment due to cost constraints. Richard had insisted that the medication be priced at cost, plus a modest markup, ensuring that even patients with limited insurance coverage could afford the treatment. The decision had been controversial among early investors who expected higher profit margins, but Richard believed that building trust with the medical community and patient populations would create long-term business success. For the first decade of the company's existence, Richard maintained close relationships with practicing physicians and spent significant time in hospitals observing how medications were actually used in patient care. He regularly visited emergency rooms, attended medical conferences focused on clinical practice rather than business development, and sought feedback from doctors who were treating patients in challenging circumstances. But as Harthwell Pharmaceuticals grew larger and more profitable, Richard's role evolved from hands-on healthcare entrepreneur to corporate executive managing a publicly traded company worth billions of dollars. The pressures of quarterly earnings reports, shareholder expectations, and competitive market dynamics gradually shifted his focus from patient outcomes to financial performance. Dr. Williams had left the company in 2010, frustrated by what she perceived as Richard's increasing emphasis on profit maximization over medical mission. Her departure had been acrimonious, with heated disagreements about pricing policies, research priorities, and the company's commitment to serving underserved populations. "You've forgotten why we started this company," Dr. Williams had told Richard during their final confrontation in his newly renovated executive suite. "We wanted to help people who couldn't afford medical care, not just create another pharmaceutical company that charges premium prices for life-saving treatments." Richard had defended his business decisions as necessary for the company's survival and growth, arguing that higher profits would enable greater investment in research and development that would ultimately benefit more patients. But privately, he struggled with the tension between his original mission and the financial pressures that dominated his daily decision-making process. The corner office that now served as Richard's command center was a monument to wealth and corporate success that would have been unimaginable during the company's early years. The mahogany desk, imported from Brazil at a cost of $50,000, dominated a room that measured 800 square feet, larger than many family apartments in the neighborhood served by public hospitals like St. Mary's. Behind his chair hung a collection of honorary doctorates from universities that had recognized his philanthropic donations rather than any medical expertise or scientific contribution. The walls displayed photographs of Richard with presidents, senators, and other pharmaceutical executives, creating an impressive backdrop for business meetings but revealing nothing about medical knowledge or patient care experience. The office's most prominent feature was a glass case containing awards for corporate responsibility and philanthropic leadership, achievements that Richard genuinely valued, but which represented a sanitized version of healthcare engagement that kept him insulated from the harsh realities faced by patients and healthcare providers in underfunded settings. Richard's daily routine reflected his disconnection from medical practice and patient care. Each morning, he arrived at exactly 7:15 in his custom Tesla Model S Plaid, a vehicle that cost more than twice the annual salary of most nurses at public hospitals. His reserved parking space in the building's executive garage ensured that he never encountered the parking challenges faced by hospital workers who often paid significant portions of their income for the privilege of working in urban medical centers. The private elevator that carried Richard directly to the executive floor eliminated any casual interactions with employees who might have provided different perspectives on the company's mission and impact. His administrative assistant, Sarah Chen, managed his schedule to maximize efficiency and minimize exposure to situations that might be uncomfortable or challenging to his corporate worldview. Richard's understanding of medicine was purely theoretical and financial, derived from quarterly reports and market research, rather than direct observation of patient care. When Richard reviewed sales data about medication usage, he saw numbers representing market penetration and revenue generation, rather than human lives that had been saved or improved by pharmaceutical interventions. The disconnect was particularly evident in Richard's approach to pricing decisions. When his executive team discussed pricing strategies for new medications, the conversations focused on maximizing shareholder returns and competitive positioning rather than affordability for patients who needed the treatments. Richard had convinced himself that market-based pricing naturally produced the best outcomes for society by encouraging innovation and investment in medical research. His understanding of healthcare economics was limited to corporate finance and pharmaceutical industry trends, without consideration of how medication costs affected individual families and communities. When Richard read reports about patients rationing insulin or skipping doses of cardiac medications due to cost constraints, he interpreted these stories as unfortunate but inevitable consequences of market dynamics rather than moral failures that his company could help address. The irony was profound and growing more apparent with each passing year. Harthwell Pharmaceuticals had made its fortune from cardiac medications developed by researchers like Dr. Williams, who had since left the company or died. Their original vision for affordable healthcare abandoned in pursuit of maximum profitability. The company's three biggest revenue generators were heart disease treatments that doctors like Michael Santos prescribed daily to save lives. Yet Richard had never observed surgery, never witnessed a medical emergency, never held the hand of a dying patient, or consoled a grieving family. His personal healthcare choices reinforced his isolation from the medical realities faced by most Americans. Richard maintained his own health through an exclusive concierge medical service called Platinum Health Partners that charged $75,000 annually for unlimited access to elite physicians, same-day appointments, and comprehensive health management services. His annual physical examinations were conducted at the Manhattan Executive Health Center, a private medical facility that resembled a luxury spa more than a hospital. The center featured marble floors, original artwork, gourmet dining options, and amenities designed to make wealthy clients feel comfortable while receiving medical care. Richard's medical team included specialists in cardiology, endocrinology, dermatology, and preventive medicine, all available at his convenience without waiting periods or insurance complications. The contrast with public hospitals like St. Mary's was stark and painful. While Richard received medical care in private suites with concierge services, patients at Michael's hospital waited hours in overcrowded emergency rooms, shared rooms with multiple patients, and often received care from overworked staff, managing far more patients than optimal care standards recommended. Richard had convinced himself that his level of medical care represented what healthcare should be for everyone, without recognizing that such services were accessible only to the wealthiest fraction of the population. When his marketing team developed campaigns about democratizing healthcare, Richard interpreted this as making premium services more widely available rather than ensuring that basic medical care reached people who couldn't afford any care at all. His public appearances were carefully orchestrated theater designed to maintain his image as a compassionate healthcare leader without exposing him to the complexities and challenges of actual medical practice. When Harthwell donated medical equipment to children's hospitals, Richard would arrive in a convoy of luxury vehicles, speak briefly to assembled media representatives, pose for photographs with oversized symbolic checks, and leave before actually entering patient care areas where he might encounter sick children and worried families. The company's charitable activities were managed by a team of public relations specialists who ensured maximum media coverage while minimizing Richard's exposure to the actual realities of medical need. Donations were carefully calculated to provide tax benefits and positive publicity rather than addressing the most urgent healthcare challenges faced by underserved communities. When Harthwell funded medical research, Richard would announce the grants at press conferences held in five-star hotels, but he never visited the laboratories where researchers worked with limited budgets and outdated equipment to develop life-saving treatments. His speeches about supporting medical innovation focused on the company's generosity and vision, rather than the practical challenges faced by researchers trying to conduct important work with inadequate resources. The executive team that surrounded Richard reflected his priorities and reinforced his worldview, creating an echo chamber that validated his business decisions while insulating him from different perspectives. His chief operating officer, Marcus Webb, was a former investment banker from Goldman Sachs who had never worked in healthcare but excelled at optimizing profit margins and operational efficiency. Marcus viewed hospitals as customers to be maximized rather than institutions serving human needs. His approach to healthcare was entirely transactional, focused on increasing sales volumes and reducing costs without consideration of how these strategies affected patient care or healthcare provider working conditions. Marcus regularly proposed pricing strategies that would maximize revenue from patients with good insurance while limiting access for those who couldn't afford premium medications. During executive meetings, Marcus would present detailed analyses of market segmentation and pricing optimization, treating medications like luxury goods that should be priced according to what the market would bear rather than what patients could afford. His presentations included sophisticated financial models that demonstrated how pricing strategies could increase shareholder returns, but never included information about how many patients might go without treatment due to cost considerations. The Chief Marketing Officer, Victoria Sterling, had come to Harthwell from luxury goods marketing at Louis Vuitton, where she had specialized in creating desire for premium products among affluent consumers. Victoria approached pharmaceutical marketing with the same strategies she had used to sell $1,000 handbags, positioning medications as lifestyle choices rather than medical necessities. Victoria's marketing campaigns emphasized the premium quality and sophisticated technology behind Harthwell medications, targeting affluent patients and physicians who served wealthy populations. Her strategies included partnerships with exclusive medical practices, sponsorship of luxury medical conferences, and advertising in publications read by high-income demographics rather than reaching patients who most needed access to affordable medications. Under Victoria's leadership, Harthwell's marketing budget had shifted from patient education and community health initiatives toward brand positioning and premium market development. She had discontinued programs that provided medication information in multiple languages, eliminated support for community health fairs in low-income neighborhoods, and redirected resources toward marketing efforts that reached affluent patients who could afford premium pricing. The Chief Financial Officer, David Chen, measured success purely through financial metrics and quarterly performance indicators that emphasized short-term profitability over long-term sustainability or social impact. David had restructured Harthwell's research priorities to focus on medications that served wealthy populations with chronic conditions requiring long-term treatment, while systematically eliminating programs that addressed acute conditions affecting poor communities. David's financial analyses consistently recommended against developing medications for diseases that primarily affected low-income populations, arguing that such investments would not generate adequate returns for shareholders. His reports included detailed calculations demonstrating that research funding should prioritize conditions affecting affluent patients who could afford premium pricing and had insurance coverage that would support high medication costs. During budget planning meetings, David would present compelling arguments for eliminating charitable programs and patient assistance initiatives, describing such activities as inefficient uses of shareholder resources that reduced profitability without providing measurable business benefits. His financial models treated patient suffering as an external cost that did not appear on company balance sheets, making it easy to justify decisions that maximized profits while ignoring human consequences. This was the environment that had shaped Richard's worldview for over a decade. Weekly executive meetings reinforced the belief that business success naturally translated to societal benefit, that profit maximization inherently served the greater good, and that anyone who couldn't afford premium healthcare simply wasn't trying hard enough to succeed in a free market economy. The corporate culture at Harthwell had evolved to celebrate financial achievements while downplaying or ignoring the human impact of business decisions. Success was measured by stock price performance, quarterly earnings growth, and market share expansion rather than patient outcomes, medication accessibility, or contributions to public health. Employee performance evaluations focused on revenue generation and cost reduction rather than patient satisfaction or healthcare provider relationships. Sales representatives were rewarded for maximizing prescription volumes and pricing rather than ensuring that patients received appropriate treatments they could afford. Research staff were evaluated based on the commercial potential of their discoveries rather than the medical significance or humanitarian value of their work. The company's Manhattan headquarters building itself reflected these priorities and values. The 50-story tower had cost $400 million to construct, featuring imported marble, custom artwork, and technological systems that provided every conceivable luxury for executives and staff members. The building's design emphasized prestige and corporate success rather than functionality or efficiency, with amenities that would have been impossible to justify if the primary goal was serving patients rather than impressing business partners. The lobby displayed awards for architectural excellence and corporate responsibility, creating an impressive backdrop for visiting clients and investors while communicating nothing about medical expertise or patient care commitments. The executive floors featured private dining rooms, conference facilities with state-of-the-art technology, and artwork collections that cost more than entire annual budgets for community health centers. But Richard had never visited St. Mary's Children's Hospital, where Dr. Santos worked in a facility built in 1962 with limited renovations since then. He had never seen medical professionals performing life-saving procedures with equipment that private hospitals had discarded as obsolete, or witnessed families choosing between medication costs and basic living expenses like food and housing. The contrast between Richard's corporate environment and the reality of public hospital medicine was stark and would have been shocking if he had been willing to experience it directly. While Harthwell executives worked in climate-controlled offices with ergonomic furniture and gourmet catering, physicians at public hospitals often worked in overcrowded conditions with outdated equipment and inadequate support staff. On that Tuesday in September, Harthwell was hosting its annual Humanized Medicine Conference, an event that had evolved over 15 years into the pharmaceutical industry's most prestigious and exclusive gathering. The conference brought together the nation's leading medical specialists, research scientists, hospital administrators, and pharmaceutical executives at the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, a venue selected specifically for its luxury amenities and reputation for serving elite clientele. The conference had become a showcase for pharmaceutical companies to display their latest innovations, announce research partnerships with prestigious medical schools, and network with key opinion leaders who influence prescribing patterns across the country. Registration fees started at $5,000 per person, effectively excluding most practicing physicians from public hospitals who couldn't afford such expenses from their personal budgets or institutional funding. The attendee list read like a directory of the most powerful people in American medicine and pharmaceutical development. Medical school deans from Harvard, Johns Hopkins, and Mayo Clinic would be presenting research findings and discussing future directions in medical education. Hospital CEOs from premier institutions across the country would be networking and sharing strategies for operational excellence and financial sustainability. Pharmaceutical executives from Harthwell's major competitors would be attending to monitor industry developments and identify partnership opportunities. Government health officials from the FDA and CDC would be participating in panel discussions about regulatory frameworks and public health initiatives. International delegates from European and Asian pharmaceutical companies would be exploring opportunities for global collaboration and market expansion. Richard had personally insisted on inviting Dr. Michael Santos, whose reputation in pediatric cardiac surgery had reached even the pharmaceutical industry's corporate circles, despite his work in public medicine. The invitation was strategic rather than respectful, having real doctors from public hospitals endorsing Harthwell products would provide authenticity to the company's marketing claims about serving all patient populations. But Richard's knowledge of Dr. Santos came entirely from marketing reports prepared by subordinates who had researched influential physicians without meeting them personally. To Richard, Michael was a name on a list of strategically valuable endorsers rather than a human being whose daily work saved children's lives under challenging circumstances that Richard couldn't imagine. The invitation letter that had been sent to Dr. Santos was carefully crafted to emphasize the honor of being selected while downplaying any expectations about endorsing specific products or company policies. The letter, written on Harthwell's premium letterhead, had described the conference as an opportunity to share your expertise with industry leaders who are committed to advancing pediatric medicine for underserved populations. Michael had accepted the invitation reluctantly, hoping that the presentation would provide a platform to advocate for better medication access and research funding for public hospitals. He had spent weeks preparing a presentation that would educate pharmaceutical executives about the realities of treating critically ill children with limited resources, hoping to build bridges between industry and public medicine. His presentation slides included case studies of successful treatments using older medications and equipment, innovative surgical techniques that had been developed to work within public hospital constraints, and research proposals that could improve outcomes for pediatric patients, regardless of their families' financial circumstances. But Michael's preparation had been conducted during his limited free time, often late at night after completing surgeries and patient rounds. He had no funding for professional presentation design or travel expenses, and had planned to drive from the hospital directly to the conference venue between his morning surgery schedule and his evening patient rounds. Dr. Michael Santos represented everything Richard claimed to value, but had never actually experienced or understood. Born to immigrant parents from Guatemala who had fled civil war in their homeland during the 1980s, Michael's family story embodied the American dream achieved through hard work, sacrifice, and unwavering determination to build a better life for their children, despite facing significant obstacles and discrimination. His father, Carlos Santos, had worked construction jobs during the day and cleaned office buildings at night, often averaging 16 hours of physical labor daily to support his family while earning wages that barely covered basic living expenses. Carlos had been a respected teacher in Guatemala, but his credentials were not recognized in the United States, forcing him to take whatever employment he could find while supporting a wife and 3 children. His mother, Elena Santos, took care of other families' children during the day and cleaned houses in the evenings, sending every possible dollar toward their children's education and health care while sacrificing her own needs and dreams. Elena had been a nurse in Guatemala, but language barriers and credential recognition issues prevented her from working in her profession, forcing her into domestic work that paid minimal wages without benefits or job security. The Santos family had lived in a basement apartment in a deteriorating neighborhood where violence and drug activity were constant concerns. Their monthly rent consumed 60% of their combined income, leaving little money for food, clothing, or health care. The children shared a single bedroom while their parents slept on a fold-out couch in the main room, creating living conditions that would have been unimaginable to families served by Harthwell's executive health programs. Michael had worked 3 jobs to pay for medical school while maintaining academic excellence that would have been impossible without extraordinary dedication and sacrifice. He tutored undergraduate students in biology and chemistry, worked as a security guard during overnight shifts at office buildings, and conducted data entry for medical research projects, often sleeping only 3 or 4 hours per night while carrying a full academic course load. His study habits were legendary among his medical school classmates, many of whom came from wealthy families and could focus entirely on their academic work without financial pressures. Michael studied by flashlight during quiet moments of his security shifts, memorizing anatomy textbooks and pharmacology references while patrolling empty office buildings, transforming necessary work time into additional study opportunities. The physical demands of working multiple jobs while attending medical school had taken a toll on Michael's health and social life, but he viewed these sacrifices as investments in his ability to serve patients who face similar challenges. While his classmates attended social events and networking activities, Michael was either working or studying, developing the work ethic and time management skills that would serve him throughout his medical career. The Santos family had never owned health insurance during Michael's childhood, relying instead on community clinics and emergency rooms for medical care when absolutely necessary. Minor illnesses and injuries were treated at home with limited resources, and routine preventive care was considered an unaffordable luxury rather than a basic health need. When Michael's younger sister Carmen had been diagnosed with a congenital heart condition at age 8, the family faced a devastating choice between their mortgage payments and the medical bills that would save her life. The diagnosis had come during a routine school screening when a nurse detected an unusual heart rhythm that required immediate cardiology evaluation. The cardiologist's examination had revealed a complex heart defect that would require multiple surgeries to correct, with costs exceeding $200,000, even with the limited charity care available at the county hospital. The Santos family's annual income was less than $30,000, making the medical expenses impossible to manage through normal payment plans or insurance options. They chose the medical bills, knowing that losing their apartment was preferable to losing their daughter. The family moved into a basement room in his aunt's house, sharing space with another family, while Carlos and Eleanor worked additional jobs to pay for Carmen's medical care. The experience taught Michael that healthcare decisions often required impossible choices between basic survival needs and medical treatment. But Carmen received exceptional medical care from Dr. Robert Martinez, a pediatric cardiac surgeon at the county hospital who became Michael's first hero and inspiration for his career path. Dr. Martinez had dedicated his career to serving uninsured children, developing innovative surgical techniques that achieved excellent outcomes while working within the resource constraints of public hospitals. Michael could have chosen any medical specialty, could have pursued lucrative opportunities in cosmetic surgery, executive health services, or private practice serving wealthy patients. But he chose pediatric cardiac surgery specifically because he remembered the terror in his parents' eyes when they couldn't afford treatment for their daughter. The memory of his family's financial desperation during Carmen's medical crisis remained vivid throughout his medical training, motivating him to develop the skills necessary to serve families facing similar challenges. Michael's approach to medical education reflected his family's values and his personal mission to serve underserved populations. During medical school at Harvard, he volunteered at free clinics in Boston's poorest neighborhoods, providing basic medical care and health education to families who couldn't afford regular physician visits or preventive care services. These volunteer experiences exposed Michael to the harsh realities faced by uninsured and underinsured families who delayed medical care until conditions became critical. He treated children with untreated asthma who had been hospitalized repeatedly because their families couldn't afford preventive medications. He encountered diabetic patients who rationed insulin due to cost constraints, risking serious complications rather than seeking expensive medical management. He organized Spanish-language health workshops for immigrant communities, teaching preventive care strategies and helping families navigate the complex American healthcare system that often seemed designed to exclude, rather than include, people with limited resources or language barriers. These workshops addressed everything from childhood vaccination schedules to managing chronic conditions like diabetes and hypertension with limited financial resources. Michael's volunteer work extended beyond clinical care to advocacy and community organizing efforts that addressed systemic barriers to healthcare access. He testified before the Massachusetts legislature about the need for expanded Medicaid coverage, sharing stories of families who delayed necessary medical care due to cost concerns. He worked with community organizations to establish mobile health clinics that brought basic medical services directly to neighborhoods where residents faced transportation barriers to accessing health care. His advocacy efforts included writing op-ed articles for local newspapers about healthcare disparities, participating in community forums about healthcare policy, and collaborating with social service organizations to address the non-medical factors that affected health outcomes in underserved communities. Michael understood that effective medical care required addressing housing, nutrition, education, and employment issues that influenced patients' ability to maintain their health. His residency at Johns Hopkins was marked by exceptional surgical skills and dedication to teaching that impressed attending physicians and inspired fellow residents. Michael often stayed after his official shifts to help struggling residents, sharing techniques he had learned and providing encouragement to colleagues who doubted their abilities under the intense pressure of surgical training. His attending physicians noted his unusual combination of technical excellence and genuine compassion for patients and families, qualities that distinguished him from residents who focused primarily on developing surgical skills without considering the human dimensions of medical care. Michael's patient evaluations consistently highlighted his ability to communicate complex medical information in understandable terms, and his sensitivity to the emotional needs of families facing medical crises. During his fellowship training in pediatric cardiac surgery at Boston Children's Hospital, Michael had access to the most advanced surgical technologies and techniques available anywhere in the world. The experience taught him how excellent outcomes could be achieved with premium resources, but it also reinforced his commitment to developing methods that would work within the constraints faced by public hospitals. The fellowship program at Boston Children's Hospital exposed Michael to cutting-edge research, innovative surgical techniques, and state-of-the-art medical equipment that represented the pinnacle of pediatric cardiac care. He worked alongside internationally renowned surgeons who had developed breakthrough treatments and surgical approaches that were saving children's lives around the world. But even in this elite medical environment, Michael never forgot his commitment to serving underserved populations. He conducted research comparing surgical outcomes between premium private hospitals and resource-limited public facilities, documenting how skilled surgeons could achieve excellent results with older equipment and limited support staff when proper techniques and careful planning were employed. His research challenged assumptions about the necessity of expensive technologies for quality cardiac surgery, demonstrating that surgical skill and experience often mattered more than equipment sophistication. Michael's studies showed that many surgical complications resulted from inadequate training or poor decision-making rather than equipment limitations, suggesting that focused education and mentorship programs could improve outcomes more effectively than expensive technology upgrades. For 15 years since completing his fellowship training, Michael had dedicated his life to children who couldn't afford private medical treatment. He worked at St. Mary's Children's Hospital, a public facility that served the poorest neighborhoods in the city, where the patient population included undocumented immigrants who feared deportation, uninsured working families who earned too much for Medicaid but too little for private insurance, and children whose parents couldn't take time off work for medical appointments without losing their jobs. His typical day began at 5 in the morning with rounds on hospitalized patients, reviewing overnight developments and adjusting treatment plans based on each child's progress. Michael personally examined every patient under his care, spending time with families to address concerns and answer questions that might seem minor to busy medical staff but were critically important to worried parents. The early morning hours at St. Mary's were often the most peaceful time of day, when hospital corridors were quiet and Michael could focus on individual patient needs without the constant interruptions and emergencies that characterized daytime operations. He used this time to review surgical plans, consult with other specialists, and ensure that each patient received personalized attention rather than standardized care protocols. His surgical schedule often included emergency procedures that required immediate intervention to save children's lives. Unlike private hospitals, where elective surgeries could be postponed to accommodate emergencies, public hospitals like St. Mary's operated with limited surgical capacity that required constant prioritization and scheduling flexibility. Michael had become expert at triaging complex cases and making difficult decisions about which patients required immediate surgery versus those who could wait for more optimal timing. The emergency cases were often the most challenging and rewarding aspects of Michael's work, requiring him to make quick decisions under pressure while working with equipment and resources that were adequate but not optimal. These situations tested his surgical skills, clinical judgment, and ability to improvise solutions when standard protocols weren't sufficient to address complex medical problems. Michael performed surgeries that saved lives while working with equipment that private hospitals had donated after purchasing newer models. The operating rooms at St. Mary's featured functional but outdated technology that required additional skill and experience to achieve optimal outcomes. Michael had become expert at adapting surgical techniques to work within these constraints, often achieving results that rivaled those of premier private facilities. The equipment limitations required Michael to develop innovative surgical approaches that relied on skill and experience rather than technology-dependent solutions. He had modified standard surgical procedures to work with older monitoring equipment, adapted techniques to accommodate limited instrumentation options, and developed protocols that achieved excellent outcomes despite resource constraints that would have challenged less experienced surgeons. Between surgeries, Michael comforted families who spoke little English, using his fluent Spanish and basic knowledge of other languages spoken by immigrant communities served by the hospital. He advocated for patients whose parents worked multiple jobs just to keep food on the table, helping families navigate insurance systems and access charitable programs that could reduce medical costs. These interactions with families were among the most meaningful aspects of Michael's work, providing opportunities to address not just medical needs, but also the emotional and practical challenges faced by families dealing with serious childhood illnesses. Michael understood that successful treatment required addressing the entire family's needs, including financial concerns, language barriers, and cultural differences that could affect treatment compliance and outcomes. Michael frequently contributed his own money for medications that insurance didn't cover, viewing these expenses as professional obligations rather than personal charity. When families couldn't afford prescription medications prescribed after surgery, Michael would often purchase them personally rather than risk poor outcomes due to inadequate post-operative care. These financial contributions represented significant personal sacrifices for Michael, whose public hospital salary was modest compared to private practice opportunities he had declined. But he viewed these expenses as investments in patient welfare that were essential to maintaining his integrity as a physician, committed to serving all patients regardless of their financial circumstances. His colleagues at St. Mary's had tremendous respect for Michael's clinical skills and dedication, but many questioned his financial decisions and career choices. Other physicians with his qualifications had moved to private practice, where they earned 3 to 4 times his public hospital salary while working shorter hours and facing fewer administrative burdens and resource constraints. The salary difference was substantial and growing larger each year as private practice opportunities became more lucrative while public hospital budgets remained constrained. Michael's colleagues often reminded him that he could be earning between $400,000 and $700,000 annually in private practice, compared to his current salary of $120,000 at St. Mary's. But Michael consistently explained his career choices in terms of mission and purpose rather than financial considerations. These children need someone who understands what it means to be afraid you can't afford medical care, he would tell colleagues who questioned his decisions. If I leave for private practice, who will take care of them? Michael's surgical skills had earned him international recognition within the pediatric cardiac surgery community, despite his work in a public hospital setting that limited his visibility to pharmaceutical industry executives and medical conference organizers. He had developed innovative techniques for repairing complex heart defects in children, methods that required exceptional skill but utilized standard equipment available at public hospitals. His technical innovations focused on achieving optimal outcomes with commonly available equipment rather than developing procedures that required expensive new technologies. Michael's surgical approaches emphasized careful planning, precise technique, and creative problem-solving rather than dependence on sophisticated instrumentation that might not be available in resource-limited settings. His research had been published in prestigious medical journals, including the New England Journal of Medicine, the Journal of Thoracic and Cardiovascular Surgery, and Circulation, establishing his reputation among academic medical professionals who respected his contributions to surgical knowledge and technique development. His publications focused on practical innovations that could be implemented in various hospital settings rather than research that required expensive equipment or elaborate support systems. Michael regularly received invitations to speak at medical conferences around the world, sharing his expertise with surgical colleagues who worked in better-funded settings. His presentations focused on techniques that could improve outcomes for pediatric patients, regardless of hospital resources, emphasizing skill development and innovative approaches rather than technology-dependent solutions. His international speaking invitations had come from medical societies in Europe, Asia, and Latin America, where healthcare systems often faced similar resource constraints to those he encountered at St. Mary's. Michael's reputation for achieving excellent outcomes with limited resources made his expertise particularly valuable to surgeons working in developing countries or public health systems with constrained budgets. But Michael consistently declined speaking opportunities that required expensive travel or registration fees, preferring to spend his limited time and resources on patient care rather than professional networking. His reputation grew through word of mouth among medical colleagues who respected his dedication to serving underserved populations, but remained largely unknown to pharmaceutical executives who attended different conferences and moved in different professional circles. The invitations he declined often included speaking fees that would have significantly supplemented his modest salary, but Michael prioritized patient care responsibilities over professional advancement opportunities that would take him away from St. Mary's. His commitment to being available for emergency cases and patient care needs meant that he rarely traveled for professional purposes, limiting his exposure to industry networks that could have advanced his career. His medical school debt had been paid off only 2 years earlier, despite his exceptional skills and internationally recognized expertise, because he chose service over profit throughout his career. Private cardiac surgery practices had offered him positions with salaries ranging from $400,000 to $700,000 annually, complete with signing bonuses, luxury benefits packages, and partnership opportunities that could have made him wealthy within a few years. The debt burden had been substantial, requiring monthly payments that consumed a significant portion of his modest salary for over a decade after completing his fellowship training. Michael had lived frugally during this period, sharing a small apartment with his wife Elena and avoiding expenses that his colleagues in private practice considered normal aspects of professional life. The offers from private practice had been tempting, particularly during difficult financial periods when Michael struggled to pay his own student loans while contributing to patients' medication costs. Private practice representatives had painted appealing pictures of professional satisfaction, financial security, and lifestyle improvements that would have transformed his daily experience of practicing medicine. Some of the private practice opportunities had included research components that would have allowed Michael to continue his academic interests while earning substantially higher salaries. These positions offered the possibility of conducting cutting-edge research with unlimited funding while serving affluent patient populations who could afford premium medical services. Michael consistently declined these offers, often to the bewilderment of colleagues who questioned his financial decisions and career priorities. His standard response reflected his core values and commitment to serving populations that had limited alternatives. These children need someone who understands what it feels like to be afraid you can't afford medical care. If I leave for private practice, who will take care of them? His approach to medicine was holistic and deeply personal, informed by his family's experience navigating healthcare systems as uninsured immigrants who faced language barriers and cultural misunderstandings. Michael had learned fluent Spanish to communicate directly with patients' families, understanding that language barriers often created additional stress for parents facing their children's medical crises. Language skills had required significant time and effort to develop, but Michael viewed multilingual communication as an essential professional competency for serving diverse patient populations. He had studied Spanish formally during medical school and continued improving his skills through daily interactions with Spanish-speaking families at St. Mary's. He studied the cultural backgrounds of the communities he served, learning about traditional healing practices that he could respectfully incorporate into modern medical treatment plans when appropriate. Michael understood that many immigrant families had concerns about interactions with authority figures and institutional systems, requiring additional sensitivity and cultural competence from healthcare providers. His cultural education included understanding family dynamics, religious beliefs, and traditional approaches to health and illness that influenced how different communities responded to medical recommendations. Michael learned to work within cultural frameworks rather than imposing Western medical perspectives without considering patients' cultural contexts and beliefs. Michael often stayed late after his official shifts to explain procedures to worried parents who had never been inside a hospital before, drawing diagrams and using simple language to help families understand their children's conditions and treatment options. These educational sessions were time-consuming but essential for ensuring that families could make informed decisions about their children's care and comply with post-operative treatment requirements. He kept a collection of children's books in multiple languages in his office, reading to young patients before surgeries to help calm their fears and establish trusting relationships. The books included stories about brave children overcoming challenges, educational materials about heart surgery, written for young audiences, and cultural stories that connected with patients' family backgrounds and traditions. His office walls displayed artwork created by former patients, thank you letters from families, and photographs of children whose lives he had saved through complex surgical procedures. These mementos provided daily reminders of why he had chosen public medicine despite the financial sacrifices and professional challenges that characterized his career. The thank you letters were particularly meaningful to Michael, often written in multiple languages and expressing gratitude that went far beyond professional appreciation for medical services. Families wrote about how Michael had saved not just their children's lives, but their families' hopes and dreams, providing care that would have been unaffordable through private medical services. When Michael left St. Mary's that Tuesday morning to attend the Harthwell conference, he was coming directly from the most challenging and emotionally draining surgery of his career. 7-year-old Maria Gonzalez had been brought to the emergency room after being struck by a delivery truck while walking to school with her older brother, an accident that occurred when Maria chased a soccer ball into the street in front of their apartment building. The accident had happened during morning rush hour on a busy street where delivery trucks frequently violated speed limits while making commercial deliveries. Maria's older brother had tried to stop her from chasing the ball, but she had darted into traffic before he could catch her. The delivery truck driver had attempted to brake but couldn't avoid striking the child, who was thrown several feet by the impact. The call had come at 7 in the evening on Monday, interrupting Michael's dinner with his wife Elena, a nurse practitioner who also worked at public hospitals serving underserved populations. They had been planning a rare evening together, discussing Elena's work with diabetic patients and Michael's upcoming presentation at the pharmaceutical conference. Elena had immediately recognized the gravity of the situation when Michael received the emergency call. "Go," she had said, before he could explain the situation. "I'll save you dinner." After 15 years of marriage to a pediatric cardiac surgeon, Eleanor understood that emergency calls took priority over personal plans and family time. Maria's injuries were severe and life-threatening, requiring immediate surgical intervention to prevent death from multiple trauma complications. She had sustained multiple rib fractures that punctured her lung, creating a pneumothorax that compromised her breathing. Internal bleeding from damage to her liver and spleen was causing dangerous drops in blood pressure. Most critically, traumatic damage to her heart could cause fatal cardiac tamponade if not corrected immediately. The emergency room team had worked frantically to stabilize Maria for surgery, but her condition was deteriorating rapidly when Michael arrived at the hospital. Her blood pressure was dropping dangerously low, despite aggressive fluid resuscitation. Her oxygen saturation was declining, despite mechanical ventilation, and cardiac monitors showed irregular rhythms that indicated severe heart damage requiring immediate surgical repair. Dr. Jennifer Rodriguez, the emergency medicine physician who had initially treated Maria, briefed Michael on her condition and the interventions that had already been attempted. "We've got massive internal bleeding and probable cardiac injury," she reported. "Blood pressure is 80/40 despite 2 units of blood and maximum fluid resuscitation. She needs surgery now or she's not going to make it." Michael had reviewed Maria's chest X-rays and CT scan results while the surgical team prepared the operating room. The imaging studies showed extensive internal injuries that would require careful repair to prevent life-threatening complications. The heart damage appeared to involve the left atrium and possibly coronary vessels, injuries that would require delicate reconstruction techniques. Michael had spent the entire night and most of the morning carefully repairing the damage to Maria's cardiovascular system, working with a surgical team that included nurses, technicians, and anesthesiologists who were equally committed to saving her life despite the resource limitations they faced daily. The surgery team at St. Mary's had worked together for years, developing the communication and coordination necessary to handle complex cases with limited resources. Nurse Patricia Williams had assisted Michael in dozens of pediatric cardiac surgeries, anticipating his needs and providing instruments with timing that reflected years of experience working in resource-limited settings. Anesthesiologist Dr. David Chen had managed Maria's pain and vital signs expertly throughout the 12-hour procedure, maintaining her hemodynamic stability despite the challenges of working with older monitoring equipment and limited pharmaceutical options. The anesthesia protocols at St. Mary's required creativity and clinical judgment rather than reliance on the newest medications and monitoring technologies. The surgery was complicated by the fact that Maria's family's financial situation meant they couldn't afford the premium surgical equipment and newer medications available at private hospitals, requiring Michael to improvise with older technology and more challenging surgical techniques that demanded exceptional skill and experience. Michael had to work with cardiac monitors that provided basic but adequate information rather than the sophisticated monitoring systems available at private facilities. The surgical instruments were functional but older models that required different techniques to achieve optimal results. The suture materials and grafts were standard rather than premium options, requiring careful technique to ensure optimal healing. The procedure required 12 hours of continuous focus, with Michael taking only brief breaks for water and to update Maria's family on her progress. During the surgery, he repaired a tear in her left atrium using careful suturing techniques that would ensure proper healing without leaving residual defects. He removed blood clots from her pericardium that could have caused fatal cardiac compression if left untreated. The most challenging aspect of the surgery was reconstructing damaged coronary vessels using grafts from Maria's own tissue. The injuries to her coronary arteries were extensive, requiring careful evaluation to determine which vessels could be repaired versus those that needed to be replaced, using grafts harvested from other blood vessels in her body. Each step required precision that came from years of practice and an intimate understanding of pediatric cardiac anatomy that few surgeons in the world possessed. Michael's hands moved with confidence, born from thousands of similar procedures, adapting techniques to work with the equipment available rather than wishing for more advanced technology that wasn't accessible in public hospital settings. The surgical team had worked together seamlessly, anticipating Michael's needs and supporting the complex procedure despite working with equipment that was functional but outdated compared to private hospital standards. The coordination between team members reflected years of experience working together in challenging circumstances that required creativity and mutual support. As dawn broke over the city, Michael had successfully completed the repairs to Maria's heart and cardiovascular system. Her vital signs had stabilized, her cardiac rhythm had returned to normal, and post-operative monitoring showed that the surgical interventions had been successful in correcting the trauma damage without residual complications. The recovery would require careful monitoring and follow-up care, but Maria was expected to make a complete recovery and return to normal childhood activities within several months. Her family would face ongoing medical bills that would strain their limited finances, but their daughter's life had been saved through the dedication and skill of medical professionals who chose service over profit. The total cost of Maria's emergency surgery and hospitalization would exceed $100,000, an amount that her uninsured family could never afford through normal payment plans. The hospital would absorb most of these costs as charity care, funded through a combination of government subsidies, charitable donations, and cross-subsidization from patients with better insurance coverage. As Michael left the hospital that morning, Maria's mother, Rosa Gonzalez, had grabbed his hand with tears streaming down her face and whispered in Spanish, "Doctor, you are an angel sent by God to save my daughter. How can we ever thank you for giving us back our little girl?" Rosa's gratitude was deeply moving to Michael, who had witnessed similar scenes of family relief and thanksgiving countless times throughout his career. The emotional connection with families was one of the most meaningful aspects of his work, providing personal satisfaction that couldn't be measured in financial terms or professional advancement. Michael had smiled gently and replied in her language, "No, Senora. I am just a doctor who remembers what it feels like to be scared and to need help. Your daughter is a fighter, and she's going to be just fine." His response reflected his understanding of the family's experience and his commitment to providing care without condescension or paternalistic attitudes that sometimes characterized interactions between medical professionals and lower-income patients. The gratitude in Rosa's eyes had reminded Michael why he had chosen his career path and why he continued to work at St. Mary's despite the financial sacrifices and professional challenges. These moments of human connection and successful healing made every difficulty worthwhile, providing purpose and meaning that justified his career choices. But now, driving from the hospital to the Harthwell conference in his 10-year-old Honda Civic, Michael felt the exhaustion that came from 12 hours of intense surgery, combined with the emotional weight of saving a child's life. His scrubs were wrinkled from the long procedure, there were small stains from the medical work he had performed, and his face showed the tiredness that came from practicing emergency medicine under pressure. The contrast between his emotional state and the corporate environment he was about to enter was significant. Michael was transitioning from a life-and-death medical emergency that had required his complete focus and skill to a pharmaceutical industry conference that represented a completely different world of healthcare priorities and values. His appearance reflected the reality of practicing medicine rather than the sanitized version that pharmaceutical executives preferred to see in their corporate environments. To Michael, the conference represented an opportunity to advocate for better medication access and research funding for public hospitals, but he had no idea how dramatically his world was about to collide with Richard Harthwell's corporate bubble. When Michael arrived at the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, the contrast between his appearance and the luxury environment was immediately apparent. The hotel's lobby was designed to impress wealthy guests with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and furniture that cost more than many families earned in a year. Conference attendees moved through the space with the confidence of people accustomed to exclusive venues and premium services. Michael approached the reception desk with the conference invitation letter that Harthwell had sent, hoping to check in and locate the presentation room where he would be speaking later that day. The reception area bustled with pharmaceutical executives, hospital administrators, and medical researchers who had paid significant fees to attend the exclusive conference. "I am Dr. Michael Santos, the keynote speaker for the Harthwell conference," he said quietly to the reception manager, an impeccably dressed man named Charles Whitmore, who had worked in luxury hospitality for 20 years and prided himself on recognizing the right sort of people who belonged in premium establishments. Charles looked Michael up and down with barely concealed disdain, taking in the wrinkled scrubs, tired appearance, and general look of someone who had just spent 12 hours performing emergency surgery. The doctor's scrubs bore honest stains from medical work, a small blood stain on the sleeve from Maria's surgery, antiseptic marks on the chest, and the general wrinkled appearance of someone who had prioritized saving a life over maintaining a polished appearance. To Charles, these were signs of unsuitability for the exclusive environment of the Mandarin Oriental, rather than evidence of medical dedication and life-saving work. His hospitality training had taught him to maintain standards that excluded people who didn't meet the luxury establishment's image requirements, regardless of their professional qualifications or personal circumstances. "Sir, we have no record of your reservation," Charles said loudly, ensuring that other guests in the lobby could hear his dismissive response. "Perhaps you've confused this with another event." The free clinic registration is probably at the community center downtown." The comment drew chuckles from several well-dressed conference attendees who were checking in nearby, pharmaceutical executives and hospital administrators who were amused by Charles's suggestion that Michael belonged at a charity clinic rather than a premium medical conference. The laughter reinforced the social hierarchy that excluded certain types of people from elite environments regardless of their qualifications or expertise. Michael felt heat rise in his cheeks as he became the focus of unwanted attention from other conference participants, but he maintained his composure and professional demeanor. "Could you please check under Santos or Harthwell speaker? I was invited personally by the company to present on pediatric cardiac innovations." Charles made an exaggerated show of checking his computer system, typing loudly and shaking his head dramatically while other guests watched the interaction with growing amusement. "Nothing here, sir. And frankly, even if there were some mistake, our dress code policy is quite strict for conference events. This is a gathering of pharmaceutical executives and prominent physicians, not a community health fair." The dress code comment drew additional chuckles from the lobby crowd, reinforcing the perception that Michael's appearance made him unsuitable for the exclusive conference environment. The implication was that real medical professionals would know how to dress appropriately for important industry events, suggesting that Michael's appearance indicated either ignorance or disrespect for professional standards. From the VIP area of the lobby, Richard Harthwell watched the exchange with growing satisfaction and amusement, drinking Dom Perignon champagne with other Harthwell executives who were networking before the conference sessions began. The scene unfolding below provided him with entertainment and an opportunity to reinforce his worldview about professional appearances to his corporate guests. Richard's elevated position in the VIP area allowed him to observe the interaction while remaining safely distant from any personal involvement in the conflict. His companions included pharmaceutical industry colleagues, hospital executives, and medical device representatives who shared his perspectives on professional standards and appropriate appearances for healthcare industry events. "Look at this perfect example," Richard said loudly enough for everyone in the VIP section to hear, gesturing toward Michael with his champagne flute while speaking to his assembled colleagues. "This is exactly what's wrong with public medicine in this country, complete lack of basic professionalism." Can you imagine someone showing up to a serious medical conference looking like they just crawled out of some emergency room? His words carried across the marble lobby, causing other conference attendees to look in Michael's direction and share Richard's amusement at the situation. Several pharmaceutical executives nodded in agreement, reinforcing Richard's performance and validating his perspective on professional standards and appropriate behavior for medical industry events. Dr. Patricia Williams, a researcher from Johns Hopkins who recognized Michael by reputation from his published research and professional presentations, started to speak up on his behalf, but hesitated when she saw the corporate politics at play. Speaking up would mean confronting not just the hotel staff, but Richard Harthwell himself, potentially jeopardizing her institution's research relationships with pharmaceutical companies. Dr. James Chen, who had collaborated with Michael on pediatric research studies and knew his clinical expertise firsthand, also remained silent, despite recognizing the injustice of the situation. His consulting contracts with pharmaceutical companies provided significant supplemental income that he couldn't afford to risk by challenging industry executives in public settings. The silence from the medical community was deafening and morally troubling. Here were professionals who had fought to save lives daily in their own hospital settings, now frozen by social awkwardness and financial considerations, rather than supporting a colleague who was being treated unfairly due to appearance-based prejudices. They knew Michael's reputation within the medical community, knew his accomplishments and expertise, but corporate relationships and financial considerations overrode their moral obligations to support a colleague who was being humiliated. The incident revealed how professional ethics could be compromised by economic pressures and social dynamics that prioritized financial relationships over moral principles. Michael felt the weight of dozens of judgmental stares from people who should have been his professional colleagues, pharmaceutical executives, and medical administrators who profited from the healthcare system he served daily. For 15 years, he had dedicated his life to children who had no resources for private treatment, working under conditions that most of these conference attendees could barely imagine. He had worked 36-hour shifts in understaffed emergency rooms, missed his own father's funeral because he was performing emergency surgery, and postponed his own medical needs to serve others who had nowhere else to turn for care. He had published 43 peer-reviewed papers on pediatric cardiac surgery and had trained dozens of young doctors who now saved lives across the country. His hands, which had just hours earlier repaired a 7-year-old's damaged heart with precision that few surgeons in the world could match, now trembled slightly with the humiliation of being treated as an imposter by people whose success depended on the very medical expertise he represented. The same hands that pharmaceutical companies like Harthwell relied on to prescribe their medications and validate their research were being dismissed as unworthy of their corporate environment. "Sir," Charles continued with increasing volume, enjoying the attention his performance was attracting from other guests in the lobby, "perhaps it would be better if you tried the community health center down the street. That seems like it would be a more suitable environment for someone of your background." The suggestion that Michael belonged at a charity clinic rather than a medical conference drew more chuckles from the lobby crowd, reinforcing the class-based assumptions that excluded certain types of people from elite professional environments. The laughter revealed the prejudices and social hierarchies that operated within healthcare industry events, prioritizing appearance and social status over medical expertise and professional qualifications. Michael looked around at the faces staring at him with amusement and disdain, recognizing the types of people he encountered regularly in his professional life, but from a completely different perspective. These were pharmaceutical executives who set medication prices that determined whether his patients could afford treatment, hospital administrators who made resource allocation decisions that affected public hospitals, and medical device representatives whose products were often inaccessible to resource-limited healthcare settings. All of these people profited from the healthcare system he served, yet they were now united in treating him as beneath their consideration based purely on his appearance and the assumption that someone dressed in scrubs couldn't possibly belong at an exclusive medical conference. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, president of the American Medical Association, was checking in at the adjacent reception desk and recognized Michael immediately from his published research and professional reputation within the cardiac surgery community. She knew his expertise and contributions to pediatric medicine, but found herself caught in the same social paralysis that had affected the other medical professionals present. Speaking up would mean confronting not just Richard Harthwell, but the entire power structure of pharmaceutical conferences that provided crucial funding for medical research and professional advancement. The American Medical Association depended on pharmaceutical industry support for many of its activities, creating conflicts of interest that made it difficult for medical leaders to challenge industry executives in public settings. Dr. Morrison's hesitation reflected the broader challenges faced by medical professionals who wanted to maintain their integrity while operating within systems that required corporate relationships for financial survival. The incident highlighted how economic dependencies could compromise moral courage and professional solidarity among physicians who should have been united in supporting their colleagues. Michael took a deep breath, controlled his wounded dignity, and began to leave the hotel lobby where he was clearly unwelcome. "I just wanted to help," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone present, expressing the fundamental motivation that had driven his entire career in medicine. He had prepared for months for this presentation, hoping to share new surgical techniques that could save children's lives and reduce recovery times for pediatric cardiac patients. His research had shown ways to perform complex heart surgeries with less invasive methods, potentially helping thousands of young patients worldwide while reducing costs and improving outcomes. The presentation he would never give contained innovations that could revolutionize pediatric cardiac care, particularly in resource-limited settings where Michael's techniques could make life-saving surgery accessible to children whose families couldn't afford premium medical services. His research had demonstrated techniques for repairing heart defects in infants that he had developed through years of working with limited resources, methods that were more effective than existing procedures, but required skill rather than expensive equipment. The lost opportunity represented more than personal disappointment for Michael. It meant that important medical innovations would not reach the pharmaceutical executives and medical administrators who could have helped implement these techniques in hospitals around the world. As Michael walked toward the lobby exit, his phone buzzed with a text message from St. Mary's Hospital. "Maria is awake and asking for you. Her mother wants to thank the doctor who saved her daughter's life." The message provided a stark contrast between the corporate environment that had rejected him and the medical reality where his expertise was desperately needed and deeply valued. The timing of the message highlighted the different worlds that existed within healthcare, one focused on profit and image, the other focused on healing and human service. Michael's true value lay not in impressing pharmaceutical executives at luxury conferences, but in saving children's lives with skill, compassion, and dedication that transcended financial considerations. But Sarah Chen had recorded everything from her position near the conference registration area. And while Richard Harthwell celebrated his victory over what he considered an imposter who had inappropriately attempted to access an exclusive professional event, she was already sending the video to her contacts in medical media, including Dr. Morrison, who would receive it just as she was checking into her hotel room. The video would document not just Michael's humiliation, but also the failure of the medical community to support one of their most dedicated colleagues when he faced unfair treatment based on appearance rather than professional qualifications. The footage would become evidence of systemic problems within healthcare industry culture that valued image over expertise and profit over patient care. Richard was at the peak of his glory during the gala dinner when he felt the first sharp pain in his chest. The Mandarin Oriental's grand ballroom was filled with 300 of the most influential people in pharmaceutical medicine, and Richard was delivering what he considered his finest speech about the future of humanized healthcare to an audience that included senators, medical school deans, and pharmaceutical industry leaders. The evening had been a masterpiece of corporate image management and networking success. Richard had presented Harthwell's latest research initiatives, announced partnerships with prestigious medical schools, and received a sustained standing ovation for the company's philanthropic achievements. The audience included senators who influenced healthcare policy, medical school deans who controlled research funding, Nobel Prize winners who provided scientific credibility, and CEOs of America's largest hospital systems who could influence medication purchasing decisions. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard had said from the podium just minutes earlier, his voice carrying across the ballroom with confidence and authority, "Harthwell Pharmaceuticals remains committed to ensuring that the best medical care reaches every person, regardless of their economic status. We believe that healing is a fundamental human right, not a privilege for the wealthy. The applause had been thunderous and sustained, validating Richard's belief that he was recognized as a visionary leader in healthcare industry transformation. He felt invincible, validated in his conviction that business success and moral leadership were synonymous, that his company's financial achievements naturally translated into societal benefits. The irony of his words would become apparent within hours, but at that moment, Richard basked in the admiration of an audience that represented the pinnacle of medical and pharmaceutical power. He had returned to his table at the front of the ballroom, accepting congratulations from fellow executives and enjoying what he expected to be the capstone moment of his career. But as he raised his champagne glass for a toast to celebrate the success of the conference and his company's achievements, the first warning came as a subtle tightness in his chest. He initially attributed the discomfort to excitement and perhaps the rich 7-course meal they had just finished, dismissing the symptom as stress-related tension rather than anything serious. At 55, Richard maintained what he considered excellent health through regular sessions with a personal trainer at an exclusive fitness club and annual executive health checkups at the Manhattan Executive Health Center. His medical team had never identified any significant risk factors for heart disease, and Richard had convinced himself that his wealth and lifestyle provided protection against the health problems that affected less fortunate populations. The pain began as a dull ache, similar to muscle strain from an intensive workout with his personal trainer. Richard had experienced something similar during particularly stressful board meetings and assumed it was tension-related stress that would resolve once the conference concluded and he could return to his normal routine. He loosened his tie slightly and continued his conversations with pharmaceutical executives from Germany and Switzerland who were interested in international partnerships and licensing agreements that could expand Harthwell's global market presence. The business discussions provided distraction from the growing discomfort in his chest, but within minutes, the discomfort escalated dramatically and unmistakably. The pain became sharp and crushing, radiating from the center of his chest, down his left arm, with an intensity that made him gasp audibly and drew concerned looks from other dinner guests. Accompanying symptoms followed in rapid succession: sudden shortness of breath that made him feel like he was drowning, dizziness that caused the ballroom to spin around him, and cold sweats that soaked through his expensive shirt. Richard's first instinct was denial, even as his body betrayed the severity of what was happening to him. He was a wealthy, powerful man who controlled his environment through money and influence, someone who had never experienced serious illness or vulnerability. Heart attacks happened to other people, to those who couldn't afford preventive care, to those who lived stressful lives without the resources to manage them properly, to people who made poor lifestyle choices that his wealth and education had allowed him to avoid. "Are you all right, Richard?" asked Dr. Helen Foster, Chief Medical Officer of Boston General Hospital, who was seated beside him and immediately noticed his sudden pallor and obvious distress. Her medical training allowed her to recognize the signs of cardiac emergency even in social settings where medical crises were unexpected. Just need some air," Richard managed to whisper. But even speaking required tremendous effort as the pain intensified and his breathing became more labored. The pain was now crushing, as if an enormous weight was pressing down on his chest and preventing him from drawing adequate breath. His vision began to blur, and he felt a terrifying sense of impending doom that he had never experienced before in his privileged life. Dr. Foster immediately recognized the classic presentation of myocardial infarction, having seen hundreds of heart attacks during her residency and fellowship training in emergency medicine before transitioning to hospital administration. Richard's symptoms were textbook: severe chest pain, diaphoresis, shortness of breath, and the unmistakable look of mortal terror that accompanies sudden cardiac events. "Someone call 911 immediately!" Dr. Foster shouted as Richard collapsed forward onto the table, his face now grey and his breathing laboured and irregular. Crystal glasses crashed to the floor as his weight hit the table, and conversations throughout the ballroom stopped abruptly as 300 conference attendees realized that a medical emergency was unfolding before them. The transformation was instantaneous and horrifying for everyone who witnessed it. Moments earlier, Richard had been the master of his domain, commanding respect and admiration from the most powerful people in medicine and pharmaceutical industry. Now he was unconscious, vulnerable, and completely dependent on others for his survival, his corporate power meaningless in the face of cardiac emergency. Sarah Chen rushed forward from the staff area where she had been coordinating the evening's logistics and managing conference details. "Call an ambulance!" she shouted, her voice carrying across the ballroom with authority that cut through the shocked silence and confused murmuring of guests who had never witnessed such a dramatic medical emergency. The man who had humiliated a doctor just hours earlier for his appearance was now having a massive heart attack in front of 300 guests from the medical and pharmaceutical elite. The irony was immediate and stark for everyone present, creating a moment of moral reckoning that would be remembered long after the conference ended. Hotel security arrived first, followed quickly by the Mandarin Oriental's emergency response team that included staff trained in basic life support and emergency procedures. The head of hotel security, David Martinez, was a former paramedic with 20 years of experience in emergency medical services, and he immediately began coordinating the medical response while other staff members managed the crowd of concerned guests. "Clear some space around the patient," Martinez instructed while beginning a preliminary assessment of Richard's condition. "We need room for the medical team to work when they arrive." The ballroom crowd stepped back reluctantly, many of them medical professionals who wanted to help but recognized that emergency situations required trained responders rather than well-meaning volunteers. Dr. Foster performed a rapid assessment of Richard's condition, checking his pulse and breathing while monitoring his level of consciousness. "Pulse is rapid and thready," she announced to the gathering crowd of medical professionals. "Respiratory distress, possible massive myocardial infarction. We need cardiac monitoring and IV access immediately." The hotel's emergency medical kit was brought forward, but it contained only basic supplies suitable for minor injuries and basic life support rather than advanced cardiac emergency equipment. Dr. Foster looked around the ballroom filled with some of the most accomplished medical minds in the country, realizing that expertise in pharmaceutical research and hospital administration differed significantly from hands-on emergency medicine experience. Most of the conference attendees were researchers, pharmaceutical executives, hospital administrators, and medical specialists whose work focused on laboratory research, corporate management, or highly specialized clinical areas rather than emergency medical care. While they understood cardiac emergencies theoretically, few had recent practical experience with life-threatening medical emergencies requiring immediate intervention. "Is there anyone here with current emergency medicine experience?" Dr. Foster called out urgently, knowing that the nearest cardiac emergency facility was 25 minutes away through Manhattan traffic, and that Richard's survival might depend on expert medical intervention before paramedics could arrive and transport him to appropriate facilities. The question highlighted a troubling reality about the conference and pharmaceutical industry more broadly. While the ballroom contained world-renowned researchers, pharmaceutical executives, medical school deans, and hospital administrators, few had recent practical experience with medical emergencies like the one that Richard was experiencing. The response was sobering and revealed the disconnect between pharmaceutical industry success and actual medical practice. Dr. Patricia Williams, a cardiovascular researcher from Johns Hopkins, approached but admitted honestly, I haven't done clinical emergency medicine in 15 years. My work is entirely laboratory-based now, focused on drug development rather than patient care. Dr. James Chen, despite his collaboration with Michael on pediatric research and his medical degree, acknowledged similar limitations. I'm a pediatric gastroenterologist with an administrative role. Adult cardiac emergencies aren't my specialty, and I haven't worked in emergency settings for over a decade. Similar admissions came from other medical professionals in attendance, each acknowledging that their expertise lay in areas other than emergency cardiac care. The gathering included brilliant minds who had contributed to medical knowledge and pharmaceutical development. But the immediate practical need was for someone with recent, hands-on emergency medicine experience. As these conversations were happening, Richard's condition continued to deteriorate rapidly. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, his breathing had become increasingly shallow and irregular, and the conscious awareness in his eyes was fading as his brain received inadequate oxygen due to his failing cardiovascular system. The cardiac monitors that hotel security had provided showed dangerous irregularities in Richard's heart rhythm, confirming Dr. Foster's assessment that he was experiencing a massive heart attack, requiring immediate medical intervention. Without prompt treatment, Richard would likely suffer irreversible cardiac damage or death within minutes. It was then that a calm voice came from the entrance to the ballroom. "I can help, Doctor." Michael Santos stood in the doorway, having returned not for revenge or vindication, but because he had forgotten his presentation materials in his car and needed to retrieve them before returning to the hospital for his scheduled evening patient rounds. The silence that followed Michael's announcement was profound and uncomfortable for everyone present. Every eye in the ballroom turned toward the entrance, where the man Richard had publicly humiliated just hours earlier now stood offering to save his life. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The doctor, deemed too unprofessional to attend their conference, was now the only person qualified to provide the emergency medical care their host desperately needed. The moral complexity of the situation was immediately apparent to the 300 medical professionals and pharmaceutical executives who had witnessed or heard about Michael's earlier humiliation. Here was a man who had been rejected and ridiculed, now offering to provide life-saving care to the person who had treated him so poorly. For Michael, the decision to offer help was immediate and unequivocal, guided by medical ethics and professional obligations that transcended personal feelings or desires for revenge. His medical training and moral principles demanded that he provide care to anyone in medical need, regardless of how they had treated him personally. For the audience, Michael's offer represented a moment of moral reckoning about professional responsibility, human dignity, and the true meaning of medical service that many of them had lost sight of in their pursuit of financial success and corporate advancement.